to promote China's image and, of course, to promote its worldview.
They are buying into cable television in countries like Nigeria and Kenya.
The support for the agenda of the existing government.
This is the story of how the Chinese government aggressively buys media and telecommunications companies in Africa.
When we talk about the Chinese investments in media in Africa, those investments that they're making are all in traditional media, and in part because traditional media in Africa is still the dominant media.
Now in Senegal, Chinese media group StarTimes have acquired the broadcasting rights to the Senegalese Football League for a period of 10 years.
I traveled to these villages far outside Nairobi. I walked in and a Chinese soap opera was playing on TV.
Why is China buying Africa's media and telecommunication businesses?
In the Zimbabwean capital Harare, a Chinese production company has begun shooting a film called When Africa Meets Chanel.
What are they doing with the media companies they already bought?
China has launched a weekly English language newspaper for Africa that will be distributed from Kenya across the continent.
How has the information space changed in Africa since the Chinese government started buying Africa's media companies?
The China Media Group has teamed up with major African news outlets to form a joint initiative.
And what's the implication of this Chinese strategy for the US and the rest of the world? To understand why the Chinese government is interested in the media space of Africa, we have to first understand why it's interested in the information and media space of its own country. In October 1644, a 6-year-old boy became the king of China under the Qing dynasty. The name of the boy is Emperor Shunju. Even though Shunju was only 6, he was to rule what was then the biggest empire in the world. As of 1644, the Qing dynasty of China controlled a vast territory that stretched from the Pacific Ocean in the east to the Caspian Sea in the west, and from Siberia in the north to the Himalayas in the south. Shunju had become king because his father, Huan Taiti, suddenly died, and as a 6-year-old emperor, Shunju needed to consolidate his power. So in 1644, the same year he came to power, the Qing government established the Tongzhou, which is a secret police agency that is responsible for spying on the population and suppressing dissent. But that won't be enough. Emperor Shunju figured that if he wanted to control his people, he would have to control the information they had access to. The Qing government then established the Bureau of Translations, which was responsible for censoring all books and publications that were imported into China. This bureau was to take the books, newspapers, magazines, or any information anyone imported to China and translate it to whatever the Chinese government wanted its citizens to know, while removing anything in any publication that the government considered poisonous for society. In 1715, the Qing government banned the novel Dream of the Red Chamber because it was considered to be subversive. In 1716, the Qing government published the Great Qing Imperially Approved Complete Compendium of Classic Literature, which is a collection of Confucian texts that was approved by the government. All other Confucian texts are banned. In 1746, the Qing government began publishing the Imperial Gazette, which is a daily newspaper that contains news and lies about the Chinese government and its activities. In 1799, the Qing government issued the 14 Articles of the Prohibition of Foreign Books, which banned all foreign books except for those that were related to science and technology. In 1809, the Qing government established the Imperial Printing Office, which was responsible for printing and distributing all official government publications. The Imperial Printing Office also censors all other books and publications that are printed in China. In his 1981 book, Prisoner Without a Name, Prisoner Without a Number, Jacobo Timmerman wrote, "The Chinese government controls information as a way to maintain power. In this regard, the Qing government's restriction on information were very effective because the dynasty lasted 250 years in power." Now let's talk about 21st century China and how the Chinese government exports media control to Africa by buying African media companies.
In China, there is no debate. The government maintains tight control on what people inside the country can and can't see, making the World Wide Web not so wide.
China censors everything.
Aggressive censorship.
Censored on Chinese social media.
The internet, sealed off by the Great Firewall.
Firewall against overseas sites.
Are completely blocked.
There is a list of keywords that are deemed sensitive.
There's certain topics you just don't talk about.
China just loves censoring.
When Xi Jinping came to power in March 2013, he wasn't coming to power looking for a formula to rule his people. From the Han Dynasty of 206 BC to the Qing Dynasty of 1644 until Hu Jintao, who was Xi's predecessor for more than 2,000 years, Chinese kings, emperors, and presidents have always used the same formula: control the information people have access to and crack down on dissent. But Xi was faced with two new challenges. One, controlling modern communications technologies, especially the internet in China. Two, influencing the media space of as many countries as possible to get them to write and say positive things about China. To solve the first problem, on February 27, 2014, Xi renamed and restructured the existing Internet Monitoring Agency in China to the Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC. This agency is responsible for policing the Chinese internet, social media, and even video games. The agency removes whatever the government deems not good and cracks down on dissent. In 2017, the Chinese government launched a Clean Internet campaign to remove harmful content from the internet. The government banned the use of virtual private networks, VPNs, the following year, and by 2019, the Chinese government had established the Social Credit System, which is a system of social control that uses surveillance data to reward or punish citizens. Xi's first challenge seemed to have been handled. The second challenge Xi Jinping faced was how to influence the media space of as many countries as he could. This is important because if China is ever going to become the world superpower, the country needs three things. First, a lot of raw materials to satisfy its ever-growing manufacturing industries. Second, nation branding or public diplomacy, which makes the rest of the world think positively about your country. Third, a lot of friends, or call it allies. Getting any or all of these becomes a lot easier if you can influence the media space of your target country. But there was a problem. Which region of the world can China get all these three things from? For example, friends and allies. Well, it doesn't seem like the Chinese government could easily get a lot of friends in Europe. What about nation branding? Again, America or India won't change their minds about the Chinese government anytime soon. And raw materials? Well, most countries don't have it in abundance. Now, if you look at this list again, you will notice that there is a continent that has all of these, and that's Africa. Africa has a lot of raw materials that the Chinese government needs to continue growing its economy. Africa is more likely to be receptive to the branding efforts of the Chinese government because the continent is growing tired of American arrogance and dictatorial tendencies. Africa is more likely to want to be friends and allies with China because they have had negative experiences dealing with America and Europe. Africans never forget colonization by European powers, nor do they forget the killing of many of their leaders and exploitation by the American empire. Africa has remained friends and allies with Europe and America since the 1960s simply because of their money. If Africa could find a country to give her loans and trade for its development, and such a country would be a little less arrogant than America, 90% of African countries would shift ground tomorrow evening. Fortunately for China, the Chinese government has some cash to give out as a loan to Africa.
China has loaned Uganda hundreds of millions of dollars in recent years.
Kenyan president is seeking another loan of about $1 billion from China.
The China loan to Nigeria.
China signed just 11 new loan agreements with African borrowers, amounting to just $1.9 billion.
Another loan of $1 billion from China.
$2 billion of loans.
$5.85 billion from China.
$60 billion in aid and loans.
$7 billion rent loan.
Loans.
The Chinese loan.
Chinese lenders provided $170 billion to Africa.
By 2013, when Xi came to power, the Chinese government had already issued more than $70 billion in loans to different African countries, and more was on the way. Now that China has softened the ground, it's time to invade Africa's media space. In August 2013, the second biggest media company in South Africa, Independent Media, was sold. The government agency responsible for the approval of the sales, South Africa's Competition Commission, announced that among the new owners are two Chinese companies. These two Chinese companies are China International Television Corporation and China Africa Development Fund. The Independent Media is a company that controls several news subsidiaries: Cape Times, The Star, Pretoria News, Isolezwe, Sunday Independent, and The Mercury. So, by having a stake in The Independent, China automatically influences multiple media companies. In June 2021, the Chinese state-owned Bohemia Culture Holdings became the largest shareholder of Phoenix TV, a media company that covered Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Algeria, and most African countries via satellite. The Chinese government allegedly invested in the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation (KBC), after which the Chinese TV drama started airing on Kenya's national television. A 2021 report about Kenya Broadcasting Corporation reads, Kenya's state-run broadcaster looks more and more like an outlet for Chinese propaganda. The Chinese-owned Star Times operates in 30 countries across the continent. The media company describes itself as the fastest-growing and most influential digital TV operator in Africa. Apart from investments and ownership in African media companies, the Chinese government has successfully planted its state-owned media all across the continent. For example, China Global Television Network (CGTN), China Daily, Global Times, China News Service (CNS), China Central Television (CCTV), China Radio International (CRI), Xinhua, etc. all operated in many African countries and reached millions of Africans every day. Okay, what about the thousands of African journalists who work for other independent media companies? The Chinese government has a plan for them too. Every year, Beijing organizes a training program for African journalists. China calls it an 18-month media fellowship for African journalists. Through this program, the Chinese government flies thousands of African journalists to China, pays for their flights, hotels, and food, and when they return to Africa, they return with an alert in their bank account. For many other media companies in Africa, China buys their hearts by donating expensive equipment for their media operations. Media houses like Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation, Ghana Broadcasting Corporation, Tanzania Broadcasting Corporation, Namibia Broadcasting Corporation, Rwanda Broadcasting Agency, Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation, and Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation have all allegedly received operating equipment from China at one point or another. Aside from media companies, the biggest telecommunications companies in Africa, Airtel Africa, MTN Group, Vodacom Group, Globacom, Etisalat Nigeria, and Orange Group all have connections with China, either by direct investment from a Chinese company or by partnership with a Chinese company such as Huawei. And what do all these media agents of the Chinese government do in Africa? Positive headlines, positive headlines, positive headlines, positive headlines, a lot of positive news reports, articles, and columns about China. A lot of African TV and radio shows show how kind the people of China are, how great the Chinese culture is, and how good, competent, honest, and honorable the Chinese leaders are. Another thing these Chinese media agents do in Africa is crack down on negative news reports about China. For example, in September 2018, a South African journalist and columnist, Azad Essa, wrote a column in a South African newspaper discussing the persecution of more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang province. The media company he wrote for informed him that such a column could not be published online, and a few hours later, they told him that they were cancelling his column. This media company is the independent media I told you that the Chinese government bought a stake in earlier in this video. Whether it's promoting positive news about China or suppressing the negative ones, the fact is, it works. Africans love China.
We want to work together with China. We believe in China.
To look at what China is doing around the world.
They are a very good partners of the city.
Thanks to the government of China.
China is helping us.
Our friends from China.
China is extremely good.
Like Chinese people.
I feel so safe in China.
China was there with us. In our liberation struggles, China supported us. When the West was colonizing us, China was helping to liberate us.
While subtle and continuous branding of any product, service, or country does work on the human mind, another reason why Africans love China is that the Chinese government isn't trying to impose its will on Africa. Unlike the West and the US, we try to make Africa accept Western values such as LGBTQ XYZ, for example, China doesn't tell Africans how to live their lives.
China has never shown any imperial interest in Africa.
Another reason why Chinese branding efforts could work easily in Africa is that, well, An average African can see the Chinese built roads, railways, and airports, unlike the US and Europe, which just talk, give lectures, and preach to Africans.
China is dealing with Africans, saying, what do you need? You need schools, you need hospitals, you need university, you need roads. They come, they build it alongside with Africans.
Roads, railways, and poor electricity supply. China's presence can be felt across those sectors.
One of the biggest libraries in the country will be built in my university, and it is being built by who? By the Chinese. So you can imagine.
They finance our infrastructure development.
As we've seen great opportunities with regard to infrastructure.
They build a road 24/7.
When I moved to Addis, it took me 2 hours to get from home to my office. It takes me less than 20 minutes today because of Chinese roads.
In his 1989 book, The Tiananmen Papers, Zhang Liang wrote, "The Chinese government's control of information is essential to its survival. One can also say that it's essential for building the Chinese empire." Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like this video.